Thanks for joining us inside the Dancer's Studio, where we bring listeners like you closer to the creative process. Inside the Dancer's Studio is a program of the National Center for Choreography at the University of Akron as a part of our Ideas in Motion initiative. This episode was recorded in the presence of a live audience in 2023. Today we join Christy Bolingbroke, our Executive Artistic Director, in conversation with Philadelphia-based dancer, choreographer, musician, photographer, and writer, Raphael Xavier. Xavier's extensive research in hip-hop forms and culture, specifically breaking, has led to the creation of groundcore, a somatic dance technique. Originally from Wilmington, Delaware, Xavier is a 2013 Pew Fellowship Grantee and a 2016 Guggenheim Fellow, as well as a professor at Princeton University.
You're a man of many talents, so I'd love to hear, when was the first time that you started to own the title and role of choreographer?
Oh, man. I don't know. I never considered myself to be a choreographer. It was just something I thought I saw how it worked. And I started taking on the process of what I thought that was. And then I realized later that I wasn't actually a choreographer. I was just trying to figure out how things worked with movement on stage. I only, I guess, maybe in the last 10 years, accepted the word or idea of choreographer based on someone else's idea of what it is that I was doing. I never said I was a choreographer. Someone else said it, and then another person said it, and another person said it. So eventually I was like, okay, cool. I'll be a choreographer.
Okay. I mean, and even accepting that only in the last 10 years, when from our previous conversations, you've been doing this for over 20 years, at least in this medium, in addition to others. So where do you start, if it is about how to figure things out with movement, where do you start as far as inspiration or a creative idea?
I don't know. I'm inspired by a lot of things, like just the smallest of things every day, whatever I see every day, or someone says something, whether it's art, a car driving by and I hear a certain sound or rhythm in the road as the tire hits the pothole or something. And I just start pulling from that. But back to the choreographer thing for a second. I understood putting moves together as sets or routines as hip-hop dancers or street dancers or whatever. It would just make up something together as a group to dance against another group, or make up these patterns that I can pull from if I go into a jam or something. So I wouldn't repeat the same thing, because repeating is not cool. Right?
We were talking about that with Minnesota Joe and breaking,
So every weekend I would go to a jam or an event with 20 new 30-second sets. And so when I started putting together choreography, I looked at those sets. So when I started putting together movements, I looked at those sets and started stringing them together. That's how I understood that. But it was coming from music that I heard, or something weird in the sound, and I thought, if I take that little piece out and loop it, or take the rain and loop a certain pattern of the rain and put on top of this thing and that thing, I have these weird sounds that trigger me to think about what I don't know. Because when I hear the same music all the time, I'm not inspired. You go on autopilot. So there's nothing in that. So between those two things, the inspiration and choreography, or choreography and inspiration, they come out of little things I notice in the world.
Well, and it sounds like a dialogue, a sort of feedback or call and response that you're intuitively embodying throughout your process. And you also have a background as a rapper, and so I'm curious how else you might talk about your relationship to music, because this sounds that there isn't that like, great, I love this song, I'm going to make a dance to this song. The dance is going to be just that long.
Yeah.
So how can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because I think sometimes, especially for younger choreographers starting out, the idea of working in silence is a little terrifying. And then it's so like naturally, innately human to move. I can't sit still when there's a beat on. So how do you navigate that in your work?
I love silence, by the way, because it doesn't, you don't have a meter to chase. Like music becomes a meter and you start trying to keep up to the beat, or you get to a certain point and you start thinking, wow, I got that much left, and you can wear yourself out. Like psychologically, you get more fatigued when there's nothing there. And so you create the timing, you create these patterns in silence that just happen. And I think that for me, it's a strength because freestyle allows me to just go wherever I need to go. It's not improvisation, it's just freestyle. So if I hear, let's just say I listen to a lot of different music. I mean, I can't even, rock, house, rap, of course, alternative, grunge, garage. I just listen to music. And I'll hear something, there might be a break of a song or a little piece that the drummer might do, or whatever instrumentation there is. And like I said, I'll pull that out and I'll extend that little thing into I don't know how long it would be. I just make it longer, and I'll go from there, and I'll take the emotion or the feeling that it's giving me, and I'll start moving to that, and then I'll write it down and say, okay, remember this feeling, remember this song. Let's pull this movement when it comes time to build on that. It could be a month later, I hear something else, I'll make notes same way and put that together with that thing, and then I start going in that direction. But as a rapper, one of the things that excuse me, you learn is to make your own beats. At least I did in the 80s, and so you begin to sample, right? But you don't want to sample and use the same thing everyone else is using, because you're called a biter, or it just gets boring. We heard that already. And you sound like this person, and you need your own style. And all. So I just started, pulling from anything, and you learn how to find those little sounds that inspire you to write a song, or which translated into me moving. And I build everything around understanding how to approach sampling with dance, or writing songs with dance. They go hand in hand. And back in the day, you didn't do only one thing. You were a rapper, DJ, a graffiti writer, and a dancer. And I just took to all of it.
Yeah. So if it's not a set length of song, and this idea, I also love the idea of sampling, pulling something out, making it longer, also without a formula, just making it longer as long as it's interesting. How, when you're making a dance, do you know that it's done?
It ain't never done.
It ain't never done.
It's never
Great.
done. But I think immediately I can base things off of time. If a presenter wants to work that's an hour long, then I'll make an hour long, or I'll make 50 minutes. But it's always been hard for me to make anything over an hour. It's hard. It's difficult without being monotonous or boring. And you're always going to have those moments, I guess, in the dance where they're like boring and people do this. And my problem is I see them.
Yeah.
I can see the
when they look at their watch.
Yeah, and I'm like, dang, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. But I don't create work for a specific time. I just do it until I feel like, okay, let me stop here and rework what I have, and however it ends up ending at that moment, then that's how it ends up.
And another very practical consideration I think that a lot of dance makers face. How do you name a dance?
That's the last thing I do.
It is.
It's always been the last thing.
And yet the work's never the last possible minute that you'll name it.
Yeah.
And it feels so short and truncated compared to this other relationship to making things longer.
Yeah. Jazz musicians, I listen to a lot of jazz too, but they always have these titles of songs that don't make no sense because there's no words, so you don't hear anybody say blueberry juice under the bed. It's just the
music. Actual title.
Yeah, right? And you're like, well, where'd they get the title from? So I started naming songs that way, and dances the same way. One of my favorite names to a show is The Unofficial Guide to Audience Watching Performance. Whole title.
I love that.
I didn't know what to name it, and I wanted to be kind of silly. And I think I don't know, might have been a Barnes and Noble, and I walked in and I saw a whole list of the guide to riding trolleys, the guide to changing car engines, right? And then
the unofficial guide to plumbing. I've seen those yellow and black books. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly. And I was like, okay, let's call it the unofficial guide to. Then I saw the unofficial guide books next to the so-and-so for dummies, right? And they were all like in this category. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. So I chose to name the show The Unofficial Guide to Audience Watching Performance.
Potholes and bookstores. You never know when inspiration's going to come from.
Exactly.
Raph, what do you look for in dancers then? Because you aren't just a solo artist, but you're constantly relating to others too. But you don't also keep a more conventional company of dancers on payroll. So I'm curious, what do you look for in movers, especially with your history in breaking, that breaking dancers don't come up through conventional conservatories?
Specifically with breaking, I like to stay in that space. So I find guys that are very interesting movers, and some people frown upon them in the circle, and they be killing it. But it's like, they don't battle well. They don't have a particular circle energy. But I can see if I put that on stage, man, I think you have a space to shine. And one of my dancers, a good friend of mine named Jerry Valmay, he was always in the circle all the time, battling. And people used to tell him, you're not ready to battle, man. You got a lot to learn, and you don't need to be battling yet. And I'm like, but every time you go out, you do something very different. And it reminded me of myself. All week, I would train to create these patterns and sets to go to a jam and dance for an hour straight and never repeat anything. And I saw that in him. So I asked him if he wanted to be part of the work. And anyone who I think moves well, and I leave dance out because it's not about the dance itself. I think movement is the ultimate dance. Like if you can move well and know your body, then you can dance is not a problem. So if people can move well in any space, I'm curious to know how I can work with them and explore things that I've never explored as a mover. And so I want to work with them. And if they want to work with me, then we go in the studio, we start to play, and then I'm familiar with what they do and how they do it. They become familiar with what I do, and then I, invite them into the work. So anyone who wants to do something different or see dance and movement very different than everyone else, I'm open to that.
And you still dance in your work too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ego keeps me there.
The ego.
The ego. I cannot.
Keeps you honest.
Yeah. I have to be in the work. I refuse not to be. And it's not like an egotistical thing. It's just that there's something, I won't even say prove, but there's something I feel I must continue to do, so the younger generation or just people in general can see that this dance it has a life beyond what they assume it to be about youth, you know? 'Cause
This is still a young
very young.
form.
Yeah. So this is the first time that that you have dancers over 50 who can still break, you know? And I'm young, I'm 52, but there's guys that are 55 years old who can still pull off some stuff, 56 who are you really like amazing to watch. But they're kind of not totally accepted as if you're 56 and you're still in the circle or you're battling, you need to give it up, right? You can't compete against a 20-year-old, an 8-year-old now, but that doesn't mean you have to stop. There's other avenues for you to play, and it's not out there yet. So I have to continue to do that so people can see, oh wow, we can continue to move this way. You know?
And in some ways, you're also exploring uncharted territory for the form at this age as well.
Yeah. Everything doesn't have to be spinning. It doesn't have to be, you know, this dynamic idea what people expect breaking to be or hip hop dances to be. I can stand still and the audience will clap, or I can just sit in the freeze and they will clap. And that's not saying I'm like some great dancer, but I've learned to harness the idea of stillness and make that as dynamic as possible, right? Because when you see breaking, it's this wow thing. But can you do that if you're just in a freeze? Can you get that same reaction from an audience? And that's the stuff I like to play with.
And how you're putting things together so that it's not trick after trick after trick after trick, which I think is the sort of snapshot misnomer that people tend to assume about breaking.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's those 5 moves. We were talking about the 5 moves.
Windmills, swipe, flares, air flares, head spins, tracks, floats, anything that makes the audience go, wow.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, you do have to touch the ground at some point.
Yeah.
You can't just be in the air the entire time or just be kicking your leg as high as possible.
And you can't sustain that, man. You can't. That's good for like maybe 10 minutes and you suck and win, but you know, works are an hour long. If you're lucky to work with me, because they're pushing 70, 80 minutes with an intermission, and now you got to go off, drink some water, come back and do that again. No.
And sustain that energy.
Yeah,
It's
that's
a
not
different
possible.
self-modulation too.
It's not possible.
And I just to understand, because you said, you know, when looking for dancers, you know, looking for guys that do this, are we colloquially speaking about guys, or is this still a male-dominated form? How does gender also play a role or a consideration in your work?
It can be guy or girl. I've had females work in my work before, and competitively, they're better than me or some of the guys that were on stage with us, and they always got the most claps and the most energy from the audience because it's rarely seen, and especially when they can hold their ground. Right now, there are a lot of females who are coming up, and they're really, really good. And I think it started mostly in Europe, where those women were just around that energy of the breaker. How can I say that? The concept of breaker was this, you know what I mean? And so when you're around that, you take that on. So you had a lot of women who had the caps pulled down over their eyes, the jeans and the shirts, you look like a boy until you take your hat off and it's, oh, there's a girl in there, no earrings, nothing like that. And then in America, you had a couple of women who they entered the space as women, earrings like this big, nice blouse, just looked really beautiful. And so it started to change the dynamic of how women looked in the circle. I mean, it's incredible when they go in there as them and do their thing is something very fresh to look at. But I choose to work with people who can really move well and respect the space and the approach to the dance, and I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I don't want to work with people who try to be something else to fit in. Just be yourself.
Well, and my own reflection in seeing your work relative to other dance forms that, some dance forms have very gendered, this is the male part, this is the female part, and it also feels very unisex in that regard. It is the people that are on stage. And oftentimes too, you're, we were talking about Point of Interest, the work that you performed in Cleveland a couple of years ago. And it was really about you pitting yourself and demonstrating the relationship of age over time. And I know that you've played with that as well, in terms of the casting and the context that these moves are being seen in, so that it's not about trying to efface age, like, oh no, we're all pretending that we're 20-something
Right.
and flipping up off the ground. It's like, no, this is different for each of us too.
Yeah. In that show, there was a young lady named Maka Malik. And if you put all of us up against each other and watch us move, she just fit right in. She wasn't weaker. She was just as strong. I won't say she was stronger, but there were some things that she was killing us in. And it's what that person brings to the table. But with Point of Interest, I wanted to not only highlight the age difference, but the ability of, you have a young person, say a young lady, and you have an old man, an older man, and you can see the lineage as, people are doing the same things. Mine is very minimal, but it's still strong. Jerry's was very hard, and mine looked just as comparable, or my movements look just as comparable. And Chris comes in with his whole modern background. It just looks like the stuff we're doing on the floor, he's doing standing up. So it's all these things to play with, but the lineage, the maturity, the longevity of the form, all played a part in me trying to find those things to keep the audience in their points of interest in that work, If you didn't like me, you're going to like Maka. If you didn't like Maka, you're going to like Jerry. But at the end, you're going to like all of us. You
could see it more often than once and have a completely different experience. Talk about the unofficial guide of audience watching. It's all related.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you see that by any chance?
I didn't see that one yet.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, I appreciate the homework. I'm also curious, you had a career already off and running as a dancer and a DJ and rapper at the end of the 20th century. You started as a company or making your own work at the beginning of this century. So as a sort of bridge artist, as someone who has the training but was just getting started at the start of the 21st century, how would you define 21st century dance practices?
Good. Googa Mooga. I don't know.
Googa Mooga?
Yeah. I don't know.
You accepted the invitation to teach under that banner, so thank you. And how would you make some sense out of that?
I don't know. I really don't know. When I got into this, I stepped into a framework that was already existent, 20, 30 years before me.
Yeah. Not just breaking, but in the dance and performance framework. Yeah.
So I came in as a performer in something completely new and different. And so when I got into this thing, I watched. I just paid attention to what was going on. And I would hear names. Now I can't even remember all of the names, but I would hear Ralph Lemon, Ron Brown,
Bill T. Jones.
Obviously, I didn't hear Bill T. yet.
Okay.
Right? And DeLavalade, Duncan. Like, I was hearing all of these names because I was not a dancer. I was not interested in dance at all. I would just break it. That was my thing. There was nothing better than that. So when I got into this space, I started hearing these people talk names, and I didn't pay it any mind until I started getting into Q&As, and I'm like, I can't answer these questions. I don't even know what to say. I don't know how to respond. So then I started slowly getting into the space of learning more about these people, and I felt like I have to, if and when I step into this thing completely, I have to know who they are and what they've done before me, so I don't repeat what I thought I knew, or what felt like I just found this glass of water. Oh my God! And people go, "Yo, dude,
we've been drinking water for years."
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I used all of those things to inform how I was going to move forward with something fresh. And so it was like really taking the tools that have already existed and been there, and rework them, that works on something completely foreign to me and the viewer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I just played that game. I just played what I thought was a game to play to fit into this to this world.
Yeah, and sort of honoring what came before you in the spirit of not repeating. I love that just as a regular mantra. When you get stuck, you know, when things aren't happening, and how to continue to move forward. My last question, if you have another mantra or great piece of advice that was shared with you that you'd like to pass on and share with our dancers and interested listeners, how do you navigate this creative career and keep going?
I will say my own quote.
Okay, quote yourself.
Gonna do that.
You've earned the right.
And I this has come from organically experiencing what my students or what people I come in contact with experience. And it is wherever you end up is exactly where you're supposed to be. Just get to where you want to go. So it doesn't matter. And you've heard this similar thing. Wherever you are, that's where you're supposed to be. But get to where you want to go. When I would watch them in moves or something, I'm showing them how they get stuck. Oh, where do I go now? Well, where do you want to go? And they just let go of something and stand up. That's all it is. When you're working in a playing field that's even, it's common sense. If you're not, it's not common sense. So
a lot of barriers.
You can't say to someone with anything, you can't say to someone who doesn't play in the same field, oh man, it's common sense, come on, you should know that. It's not. And it's almost offensive to say that to someone.
Yeah.
So when you're on the floor, as dancers with me, when you're on the floor and I give you the alphabet, we're now beginning to work in that space. You know it, A through Z. Go wherever you want to go within that framework, and you'll end up in the perfect spot. You just work with what you know, and that's all I've done all my life. I just worked with what I knew, and I've learned something new. And then I'd work with what I have learned, and then I'd take on something else. But learning all of those things allow me to have a large vocabulary to pull from and include in anything else that I do in life. So I go where I want to go anytime I want.
What I heard inside of that too is not only going where you want to go, but that it isn't a linear accumulation,
right.
That you can also let go to get there.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Inside the Dancers Studio live series is supported by NCCAkron, the University of Akron, the University of Akron Foundation, and the Mary Schiller Myers Lecture Series in the Arts. Our podcast program is produced by Jennifer Edwards. James Sleeman is our editor. Theme music by Flaco Torres. Cover art by Micah Krause. Transcription by Arushi Singh. Special thanks to the team on the ground in Akron, Ohio. To learn more about NCCAkron, please visit us online at nccakron.org and follow us on Instagram or Facebook at NCCAkron. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform by searching for Inside the Dancers Studio. Thanks so much for listening, and stay curious.